Hello, it's Duncan.
Hello, I'm Dmitry.
And this is Refactoring to Expressive Kotlin. I feel it only fair to warn you that this talk is not entirely as built. We discovered very quickly that 45 minutes is not long enough to cover scope functions, extension functions, purity versus side effects, cohesion, tiny types, and domain-specific languages, at least not while live refactoring. So if you are here to learn about DSLs or tiny types or actions versus calculations, then you may choose to leave now. Tools and techniques for Java to Kotlin migrations is on in Auditorium 15. And I trust that the Google team is going to be plugging the book that I wrote in that prize called Java to Kotlin and Refactoring Guidebook. So instead of broad, we decided to go deep, looking at what we can learn about expressive Kotlin by looking at a simple class. So today, Dmitry and I will attempt to pair program at a small desk on a huge stage whilst arguing about code in front of a, frankly, terrifyingly large audience. Right. I must warn you, most refactoring sessions at conferences don't go far enough. The following session, on the other hand, goes too far. Code.
Should we?
Code.
Okay.
You see, I can't see that for the glare. Never mind. We'll huddle up.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the class we're going to be looking at, dbconfig. I suppose probably, like in a session on expression, we should have called it database config, but I think you will get the gist. What do we see about this, Dmitry?
Well, there are a few fields, like secondary constructor, one public function, one private. It looks kind of normal.
So it's got state, and it's got operations, and they're just operations on that state, and there's methods, yeah?
Yeah.
Yep. And, but the methods don't change the state, it's immutable?
Yeah.
Okay. And those operations are just conversions, really, to other types, as far as I see. So where shall we start? Down the bottom? I mean,
Sure.
Yeah, we'll start right at the sort of inside. So we have this method called Hikari data source. And I've been doing some research into the English language, because I wasn't taught that, because I'm English. So Hikari data source is a noun. And a noun is a word used to identify a class of people, places, or things, or to name a particular one of those.
It's like a compound noun, the 3 words, right?
Oh, it is, yes. So source is a noun, data is a noun, data source is a compound noun, and Hikari is apparently Japan's leading manufacturer of fish food and recognized globally for its exceptional quality.
Did they pay you for that? Yeah.
I think we may be sponsored by water. So often we name methods after operations, like we say load or save or render action-y things. And those are verbs. And again, I've been looking it up. A verb is a word used to describe an action, state, or occurrence. They're sort of doing words.
So to be clear, you say method, you mean function in a class, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But Hikari data source is it's a method and it's a noun, but is there a verb missing?
Okay.
So we might call this what?
I don't know. Get? That's more Java way.
No, because it's not a property.
You just got rid of it, right?
Yeah, no.
Create?
Create.
Good.
Okay, so I like create. I looked that up as well. Create is bring something into existence, which is true. We're bringing something into existence. But fundamentally, like almost all of our Kotlin code brings something into existence. So maybe that's not specific enough.
Should it be a? Like that's more like English.
I mean, yeah. How about convert to Hikari data source?
Okay.
Because I think that's what we're actually doing here. And I looked up convert, and that is change the form, character, or function of something. Interestingly, we're not actually changing the dbconfig because we can't. We can't change its type. So we're really sort of returning a converted version of it. So now we've got here I mean, I think convert is implied.
So yeah, but just to be clear, I guess what you're getting at, like dbconfig is the subject of this, like a sentence, right? And then functions are kind of verbs, and we're missing a verb, but now we added it and we think it's a bit redundant, so you say do this.
I mean, personally, I don't feel I need to convert. The to Hikari data source is enough for me.
Yeah, I think like convert is implied as a verb.
Yeah. Okay, so we've implied convert, we've got to Hikari data source, and that I think is quite a bit better than just the noun. So previously we had Hikari data source, and now we've added to Hikari data source, and I'm going to say that that is more expressive. And I looked up expressive, and it says effectively conveying thought or feeling. And you might ask, why do we want to be expressive? And I think our answer is, well, I mean, why would we want to not effectively convey thought? But the sort of thread we're pulling on in this session is that humans are brilliant at understanding natural language. And natural languages are brilliant at being understood by humans. And that's not accidental, because there's been 200,000 years of co-evolution. Natural language has shaped us, and we've shaped the natural language. And almost, I think you could say, natural language is pretty much what it is to be human. It's what differentiates us from things without natural language.
It's probably the longest rename of the function in history.
We're not finished yet. Buckle up. So, we've added, the goal is, I suppose, like, how can we write Kotlin so that our natural language circuitry helps us quickly understand what the code is doing, rather than having to like parse the files like a compiler and run the code in our head. But we can't write in natural language because it's not specific enough. If it was specific enough, we wouldn't have lawyers. We can ask ChatGPT to do things for us, but I think it only really pretends to understand. So until computers get good enough at understanding what we mean and then negotiating, we have Kotlin and computer languages that are the way we express what systems do, and we have natural language, which is the thing that we really, really want to be reading, I think. Okay, so by adding one tiny word, we have more obvious intent. And the tiny word we added was...
Oh, we didn't.
So no, not that one.
Something like this.
No. Back. He's keen.
Right.
So we added to. Yes, thank you. And I looked it up, and to is a preposition, which again, I'd never learned. A word expressing a relation to another word or element in the clause. So prepositions give us a direction, and I think it's that direction that's made this readable.
Oh, there are other prepositions. You see, like as.
Oh, yes.
Why not as?
I don't think this is an as, because as to me implies that is the same thing we're looking at, just in a sort of different view.
Okay, sounds like it's used in standard library, right?
I mean, we have some, we have like this variable as string. We have casting, that's an as. But again, we're not changing the identity of a thing. We're saying, give me a different view of it. Okay, so adding direction has made the code more expressive and has managed to imply the verb. If we look at where it's called, though, there, like data source equals to Hikari data source. And my question is, well, what to Hikari data source? I mean, I can obviously at this point see that it's there, but as Dmitry is pointing out, it would be nicer if we said this to Hikari data source.
I'm not sure we'd actually do it on the project.
You see, I would. I think what we were missing was the subject. And the subject is a noun or pronoun representing the person or thing that performs an action or verb, or that's affected by the action. So it's the thing we're doing with, really. I mean, if the verb is doing. That also brought up pronouns. So what's a pronoun? A pronoun is a word that can function as a noun phrase used by itself, and that refers to either the participants in the discourse or to something mentioned elsewhere in the discourse. So pretty much, it's a word which stands in for another noun that we've already mentioned.
Should we use I, like, instead of this? Like, like the class default I?
Well, interestingly, I mean, there was a convention at one time, wasn't there, for naming properties my something, and if it was my something, it would be I, yes. So There is a special pronoun in Kotlin, and that special pronoun is this. It's the instance of a class processing message, or it's the receiver and extensions. And this is a lovely because they are, we can leave them out. They're implicit, but we can also put them in. So if it helps to make code readable, we'll put them in. And so now we have our data source is this to our data source, and I prefer that, you don't.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm happy to leave it.
You're only young. Okay, so the preposition to has told us the direction. But what if we reverse the direction?
So from somewhere.
Well, so let's just try putting the, let's put the this at the other end. So we'll put it inside, we'll make it the parameter,
Yeah.
I guess an argument on the outside. And then, wow, you're quick, but slow down just a little tiny bit. So at this point, we've got a this at both ends. We don't need a this at both ends now, so we can take out the first one, I think. Yeah, that'd be nice. Because this is, they're implicit, that's fine. And now we've got two Hikari data source, and Dmitry is trying to edit it properly to make it read nicely. And so Hikari data source from this, that reads as well. And nicely now, we haven't had to sort of bend and put the this in that we didn't have to put it on one side, so we can swap. We can do one way or the other. So we've moved this to the other end of the phrase. We've made to into from. I don't think from, I think for.
Why?
Well, I'm glad you asked.
It's going to be another 5 minutes.
No. So to my mind, from kind of implies extraction. So if we're taking some things out of something and converting, then that might be a from. We might take the address from a customer record, for example. But that's not quite the same thing as conversion, it's extraction. Yeah. So for me, for.
Very subtle. I might learn this one day.
Okay, so we've got rid of the prefix this. It's now readable, but there's a problem, and that is that dbconfig is unused. So the compiler's lying to us. Well, I mean,
basically,
not lying.
We want this, right? But we want to refactor this.
Yes. So that's where we want to be, but we're going to be a bit sort of flash and refactor our way into that. Yeah.
Okay. What's the plan?
And so instead of doing the edit, fast and beautiful it was, we're going to introduce another scope function, a scope function. Have we introduced scope function yet? No, I think we're about to. With.
Yeah, okay.
So if we say with dbconfig, then we can set up a block in which dbconfig is now this. It's the receiver. And if we're really smart now, we can basically say, well, if I had a data source that was this, so I have a val data source.
Sorry, what am I doing?
Oh, sorry. No, you're right. Val db. What are you doing? So we're going to say.
Can we move this up there? Now?
Let's try moving that up there. Yes.
I think that's the.
Oh yes,
that's
perfect.
a safe transformation.
That was all we needed to do.
Shadow,
yeah. Because now what we've done is we've taken the this that we didn't have, and we've this is now dbconfig in this class, in this function. Okay, so we were showing off really there. Does it? By the way, have we been running the tests? I haven't noticed.
I did.
You have. Oh, thank you. So we'll say that we have got tested this code. I think Dmitry is committing all the time, but he's so fast that my eyes don't see it. Okay, so that works. It's the same code, but we don't really want the with anymore. But helpfully, we can inline it.
Ooh.
Because it's just
fancy idea, right? In library functions,
which is great. There's just one problem, and that is that IntelliJ got sort of so excited that it forgot about the return.
If we leave to return, that will work. That works, right?
Okay, there we go. So nice little conversion there, and it saved us all of 4.5 seconds of typing. Okay, so now Hikari data source 4. It is a method. It has a this, but it doesn't actually use it anywhere.
So we can move this, right?
It kind of the data gets into there via this because it's the same object, but we can move it outside. So all the data is passed in the dbconfig parameter, and we move it out of the class. Are you going to argue with moving it out of the class? I think you should.
Should I?
Oh,
I think
definitely
in
you
this
did last
case it's
time, yeah.
fine. It's nice to use methods or functions close to where they're defined, right? But no, in this case it's fair enough, I think.
So why might we move it out? And I think like it doesn't need privileged access to the data operations. It can just work with all the public stuff. Creating a Hikari data source isn't a core function of dbconfig-ness, whatever that dbconfig-ness is. dbconfig, to me at least, just feels like the data. And what we do with it is app-specific, but you could take this dbconfig and use it in your app if you had C3PO and Hibernate, whereas we, it turns out, have Hikari and Duke.
It's like we're kind of decoupling.
It's a decoupling thing, yes. So we like to express what we consider the core operations on a class as methods, and maybe not so core things as standalone functions or extensions. And again, our goal is to communicate. If we don't think that Hikari is part of what dbconfig is, then we don't define it as a method, we put it as just a standalone function. I think we can pull on that thread as well with DSL context, right? Because DSL context, that sort of coupled us. So DSL context is a Duke thing, which is a database mapping library.
Yeah, it comes from Duke.
Yeah. So we could, we can just convert this straight to an extension function because you can go one way and not the other for reasons.
Yeah.
So
should that be called?
So dbconfig.
Two?
Well, yes, we were 2 before and we're 2 now, right? So that's good. Before we do, though, I mean, I think what we should do is we should look at where these things are called. So we should say the important thing is where we're reading the code, where it's being called. So
that's one place.
So dbconfig, well, splendid then. So that reads nicely. So we should go and look at the places we're calling and check that our refactor works and makes sense. So now we've got an extension function. Now dbconfig is decoupled from Hikari and Duke. Joe Armstrong said that with object-oriented programming, he wanted a banana, but he got a gorilla holding a banana in the whole jungle. And what we've done here is we can use dbconfig now without having Duke holding onto the Hikari data source gorilla and the gorilla holding onto the whole of the JDBC jungle. Okay. Back to Hikari data source 4.
I have a feeling we will not leave this file.
We're not leaving this file,
no.
and you aren't leaving this room.
Right. Okay.
So this has 6 lines, and they're statements. And a statement, I looked it up, is a syntactic unit of an imperative programming language that expresses some action to be carried out. Okay. Or, as I like to think of it, the bits between the semicolons that aren't there anymore.
They can be. And also, why semicolons, right? Smalltalk had full stop for expressions, right? That made more sense.
I think we have Algol to blame for semicolons, but I don't know.
Okay.
Now, Dmitry's sort of looking at this, and you can see that he's like trying to pattern match. He's saying, well, which of these things are the same, which of them are different? And he's divided it up now because into the different sort of categories of things. We have one which is creating a data source. We have this bit down here, which is configuration. And if we couldn't immediately see it, we might put a comment in there saying configuration. I don't know. And then the validation is a different thing. And then finally, we return the data source. I think we can probably work that out.
Just a bit of trolling.
Yes. OK, so blank lines, we can communicate an awful lot with blank lines, but the compiler doesn't know anything about them. So what we'd like is a grouping that the compiler knows something about. And in Kotlin, we use braces for those things. So if we just put braces around that bit that's all the same, yeah, those lines. Yeah,
those. Compile. It's not Java.
Oh, I mean, Java did that, and Java was happy with it. So, but in Kotlin, we have another scope function, run, I think we'll do there. So run basically just allows us to take a block and say, just execute that thing, make a scope.
I personally wouldn't do that. But, okay.
No, I rarely do it. I don't really understand run. But I do understand apply. And so I don't think we'd use run.
Here?
Yeah, so apply. Let's have a look at the definition of apply.
In definitions.
No, of apply. Like
right.
see
Source
the
code.
yes, the source code. Because the nice thing about Kotlin is that we have all these things, but they're not part of the language. They are just they're just functions in the standard library, so we can write them if we want to ourselves.
Yeah, it's just basically call the code and return this, right?
Call the code and return this. So take the receiver, the thing that we're called on, make it the receiver in a block, and then return this itself. And apply is perfect for configuring mutable objects. And as it happens, we are configuring mutable objects here.
Okay. Cool.
So we could move it manually, but there's a nice little trick in here. We can make data source equals this. Yes, now we can move those things up. And now we can inline the data source. And now we've got some thises we don't need, and we can get rid of all those. Again, like it would have been quicker, probably, to just type. But we like the refactoring tools, you know.
Yeah, I mean, in the bigger code, it can be actually more tricky, and there are pitfalls.
Somebody wrote these refactorings for us, and we should use them, I think. OK. Is that expressive enough? Well, it depends on whether you know what apply does, right? And one of the interesting things is because it's an extension, we can rename it on the way in.
You mean import alias?
Yes. So
do you want to call
this could be like, I don't know what, configured with, yeah, something like that.
Not sure.
So it's up to you. But if we want to disambiguate, if we want to change the name of something to make it make sense in context, then especially if it's a function, we can just rename it at that point. But we can't do that with methods, which is interesting.
OK, I'll just revert.
I think so, because like apply is a common Kotlin idiom, and we're going to read it in other people's code, and if we don't see configured with and we don't understand what's going on, then we're probably worse programmers. OK. Now, the nice thing about this block is that we now don't have a reference to an unconfigured data source in the top level of the function. And so we're less likely to split the configuration, less likely to try and do anything with the unconfigured object, because it's by the time we've assigned it to data source, it is configured. It's all ready for us. What about validate?
Yeah. Altenta?
No, definitely not. Never.
Oh.
So,
why not?
OK,
Altenta,
well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So you
have
could
choice, right?
Yeah. So we could just move validate inside, right? So
like this, into apply.
Into apply.
Or that one.
But I suppose the thing is, no, into the first apply. So if we put it in the first apply, then we're back to where we were before. We'd need to put in blank lines to say that this is a different section of it. But also, to me, at least, validating the data source is not quite the same as configuring it. In particular, it throws if the data source is not validatable. And so we might want to separate that out.
Maybe also then, like, nuts.
So also, I think also splendid. But I think we should do that refactor by hand so that people can see our skills.
Okay. Yeah, you tell me what to do.
Okay, so we're gonna this nice little pattern again.
We're going to call also, right?
We're going to call the parameter. We're going to call data source, which is the thing it's called on the outside. Then we're going to move it in, and then we're going to get rid of that. Okay, so that's a nice little refactor. Obviously, you don't need to do it all the time, but where you've got quite a big block, it's really, really useful. So, also used for small side effects. It's kind of like apply, but where apply populates this, also populates a parameter to the lambda, and the one we call data source here. Data source is a noun, but in lambdas we often use a pronoun instead. It. So it is a pronoun.
Ooh, should we use like they? There are more pronouns, right? Maybe a compiler plugin?
I mean, I think it is non-gendered, so we're OK.
Yeah, OK.
So in Kotlin, the it pronoun is different from the this pronoun. They're both set up in a scope automatically, but it can't be implicit. We have to, if we're going to use it, we have to say it. Whereas this, we get the option of saying it or not saying it.
Should it say validated? It's like proper English, it validate. Like.
I know, it's annoying, isn't it? So, so one of the things we can do is we can use a method reference.
Oh, yeah. Just did. I wish it's a bit verbose. I wish this worked, right?
Yeah, and I don't know why it doesn't.
Could Kotlin figure out, like Kotlin 3?
I mean, maybe it's coming in 2.4.
OK.
So personally, I find that form less communicative, but sometimes we just want to be short. If you do want your validate this, yes, validate it, we can actually play a little trick with that method reference. So if you paste the method reference, and then you can invoke on that method reference with it.
It's like the best of both approaches. I mean, I'm happy to experiment, but, you know.
So, I mean, it is a shame, isn't it, that we can't do that sort of thing. Well,
I wish it worked like this, right?
It would be nice to be able to do that. And in particular, though, I wouldn't mind the brackets if we didn't have to say the whole Hikari data source bit. But yeah, I think you're right. Even I think that's a bit too horrible. And so we're going to suck up it.validate.
Why this is not something else? Oops. Why is it not let, for example?
Well, because that adds an extra line.
Or not also, because it's...
It's not also because, again, we'd have to specify, and if we have this convention of saying apply is for configuration, then when we see apply, we say, well, that's configuration, right? Okay. Also, it's really handy for another little case, which is that we said here it's a side effect, it's a little side effect. For example, where we're configuring things up the top here, we've had trouble with accidentally writing to our production database from our development machines, and we're trying to work out why. But the problem is, how do we get the value of that expression?
Oh yeah, it's really hard in constructors, right? It's strict, so it's like cannot extract a variable.
Yeah, we could pull out a whole function to do it.
You can do also a print.
But you can do also a print line, yes.
Or convert to reference, which is, in this case, quite nice.
And in that case, I think actually the reference is nicer because, again, it's shorter and we don't get bothered by
I think also
brackets.
you have this introduced .printed.
I like printed. So toPrinted is one of the first things I bring into most places, and also a debugged. So if you put in a postfix debug that does nothing but gives you somewhere to put a breakpoint, then when you add it in, you can debug expressions.
So I made it deprecated. The monkey doesn't appear in like presentation mode. Yeah, no monkey there.
No monkey.
Oh well.
Okay. Deprecate is good. That's a nice thing because it means that we'll know if we checked in any of this little debug logging.
Oops.
Okay. Is it party time yet?
God.
Still going. Okay. Okay, so in Hikari data source 4, let's inline data source, because like that data source is doing nothing.
Yeah, the only usage I would always try and inline. Too fast?
Too fast, too fast. Okay, so just before we go on. So we had 6 statements, and now we've got 1 expression. And an expression in programming is a combination of literals, variables, operators, and function calls that produces a result when it's evaluated. And statements we evaluate top to bottom, but then data flow moves things around and so on. So control structures, whereas expressions are evaluated sort of top to bottom, but also inside out. So we have to evaluate the innermost ones, the ones that are required by other expressions. You're desperate to convert to a single expression body, so you can do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Should we drop the type?
Well, now, that's a really interesting question. Put it back for a moment, and we'll, yeah. So should we specify that type, or shouldn't we specify that type? And I'm going to say, look, I think this here, Hikari is an adjective. It's a word naming an attribute of a noun, like a red car or a bad hangover.
Or do this, just data source.
So we can specify it, but if it's obvious from just reading it what the type is, I tend to leave it out so that when I do put it in, I know I put it in for a reason. And so the reason might be that if we didn't call this Hikari data source 4, we just call it data source 4, then at the moment the return type of this is now Hikari data source dot data source, and we would want to specify that it's the top level data source by actually specifying it now. Okay. So if you put it in.
That's good enough, right?
What? Okay.
Can we move on?
So I think that it's more expressive to leave things out if they're obvious. And natural language often has sort of more information in the things that we don't say. Okay, expression bodies, underappreciated aid to expression in Kotlin. Refactoring to make a function into a single expression will often make it easier to read. We don't have to run the compiler in our heads, run the execution in our heads, because what we're doing is, A, the structure sort of guides us, and B, we say they are declarative, not imperative. So we're like declaring how to calculate this function rather than just a set of statements. Maybe this talk should have been called Refactoring to Single Expression Kotlin.
No, should we do it here then? That's
a good question.
One
so,
usage, implement this, do that, right?
Okay, splendid.
Separate lines, maybe.
So that's good, but there's a problem with expressions, and it is this before we call a function, we have to evaluate its arguments, and now Hikari data source 4, which is a thing that has a side effect that it might actually fail, is sort of buried a little bit inside DSL using. So we're used to it as computer programmers. We know that we have to evaluate the things in the middle first, but our natural language processing doesn't know that. So we can fix that with another scope function, and let's thank you, return it to sort of there.
Okay.
And let will allow us to fix that. So we'll do the refactor stage.
Thing to type.
Yes.
What do we do in data source here again? Same trick.
Yes.
Right.
And now I'll move that up into there.
Okay. This works, right? It looks messy, but it works.
It's messy, but it works. And now IntelliJ will... that was so refactor getting rid of that.
No.
You did it by hand.
That's fine.
But there isn't a refactor for lifting the return out, which is a shame. So let is another scope function. It's converting its receiver to a lambda parameter. So it's converting a this to an it. I see it as a sort of pronoun transformer. Although now I look at it, I realize that...
That's actually better.
Well, no. No, it isn't. Well, maybe it is. I don't know. We'll find out. So the validation of the... so first of all, where are we?
Just using that.
Okay, so now I look at it, the Hikari data source 4, if it failed, at the moment it throws an exception. But we could say, well, let's catch that exception and return a nullable thing.
Or maybe result type. You mean like validate fails, right? Just
yes.
Throws something.
So it does. I mean, its whole job is to not go on if it can't create a pool. So if we did that, then our Hikari data source 4 would return a nullable.
I could do
and then we'd use question mark .let. So I often find that making something into a single expression and making it declarative brings up these sort of things where we can improve the code if we just sort of embrace the constraints of single expressions.
I think in this case, the original version was simple enough, but maybe another like more complicated nested structure when like in the middle of it, there is some mutable state changing. Yeah. Then you can like flatten it with let, so that's what you mean. In this case, like...
I count it as a personal failing if I haven't managed to get rid of all local variables. Okay, so the evaluation order here is only an issue because we're using Hikari data source as a parameter to DSL using. Like I said, it's kind of the point of let. But if we had a receiver, then things would have flown more naturally. And we can do that if we were to extract this thing, into DSL context. And now if we make that the receiver, now that naturally is 2 DSL context. We're learning how much nicer that is. And I think before we go on, we can kind of just make that, oh, yeah. So you see IntelliJ looks at that and says, well, you don't need the let now because I can just chain this really nicely. So, so that's nice. I think Hikari data source need not be the receiver. That could just be a receiver.
Oh, it could be any data source.
Yes.
Right.
And as you ask the question, I think this is an as. Because we're taking a data source and we are augmenting it, if you like. We're wrapping it in Duke functionality. But whatever the state of that data source is, it will still be the same and it will be inherited by Duke. So this is a place where we have a better proposition.
I renamed too much. Okay, very manual.
Okay. So now, yes. So
yeah, this is a bit subtle for me, though. I got just this. But yeah, I'm happy. You know what? Okay. You know this code base. So.
I do. We have to ask the question now, like, has this gone too far? Do we have too many functions here?
Yeah.
I mean, the nice thing about Hikari data source
after half an hour,
slightly shorter than it was. The nice thing about having refactored this into this single expression is that we can put that single expression back where it came from. We need not have a name for it because we can read what it's doing quite nicely now in place. So if you just inline Hikari data source 4, then that's good.
Didn't work then.
Except it's not good. And to see why it's not good, let's just undo that rather than try and debug it. And what we're going to do is we're going to convert dbconfig to the receiver here. And when you do that, you see all hell breaks loose, basically. And because the thing about this is in Kotlin is that you can have lots of them in scope. And the problem we had before is we had 2 in scope, both of which had JDBC URL.
Yeah, so here there is implicit this, there is this Hikari data source, and there is this at apply.
Yes, and if it was a method, there would have been the this from the class.
It's like, why? Like, you have nested lats, and IntelliJ tells you shadowed it, but for this, it's somehow okay. Same problem with, right?
So I think it is, what should we say, the nature of Kotlin that we like things to be a little bit implicit, and we like that. But we certainly don't like that.
So go back.
So I think we should probably go back, yes. And interesting, that's a reason for choosing Hikari data source 4 rather than 2 Hikari data source. Because it allows us to use apply, otherwise we wouldn't be able to use apply without the banders of this at, and so on.
But also, to be clear, the refactoring should have figured it out, right?
I think that is probably a bug, Anton. Yeah. Okay, so when we are, if we're going to be truly expressive, I think we have to consider both how a function is defined and how it's used. So if we change one of them, we may need to change the other. I see it like a kind of, when we're writing a paragraph in a natural language, if we reword one sentence, we may need to reword the sentence after it because it'll be too long or too short. Pronouns in particular get confusing in languages, in natural languages as well, as they did here. So I might say Alice and Bob go out and he has a salad. But if I decide that to be woke and change it to Alex and Bob go out, then we don't know who had the salad. Which I think is pretty much what we had with this. So, are we finished? 7 minutes? Okay, splendid.
I think yeah.
So, we are now just coupled to environment.
Yeah, which is HTTP Cloud Native library. So, should we move out?
Well, I mean, HTTPK, we like HTTPK. And it's small, and I don't think it's a jungle, but maybe it's the cops. So maybe you don't bring it with us. And what do? You made that into a function with the same name, so that everything still calls it.
This is Kotlin code style convention. So that this is,
Okay. So we can make that sort of refactor where we keep the symbols the same so that all the code around us doesn't need to change. That's nice. It would be nice if IntelliJ actually had a refactor to convert a constructor into a function, and Dmitry didn't have to write his own. What shall we? So now dbconfig, we have a choice of name. So when it was a constructor, we have to name the constructor with the name of the type. But now we get options to call this.
Oh, there is also a question why not call these functions as a constructor of the target type, right? We have all these options.
We could, and I think the reason we don't is because, again, that communicates the wrong thing. Because when we see something that looks like a constructor, we assume the constructor semantics, and we should try and keep them if we can. So we could call this environment to, we could make it receiver, environment to dbconfig. But I don't know. So we were talking about extraction, and I think that a dbconfig is built out of only some of the environment. So maybe this is a case where this should be dbconfig from. So again, another preposition.
It's because, according to your code conventions, it's like because environment is big, right?
Yes.
It contains things.
So that's the same as, it's almost the same thing as sort of extracting the address from our order. Okay, and now dbconfig is just data. And I think really, I mean, it always wanted to be just data. I'm not against putting methods on data classes, but they kind of have to pull their weight. Defining operations as extensions, it's less discoverable because IntelliJ doesn't pop them up. Well, it does pop them up, but sort of further down the list. But it is overall more flexible. We still have to import them. But because we have to import them, it means we can rename them. So in fact, in context, if we didn't want this to be called, when we call it, we didn't want it to be called dbconfig from, we could rename it. And now we're here. I think that dbconfig is a thing that I might pull out into generally applicable things that I might reuse in projects, where the other parts of this are application-specific, if you like. So we decouple dbconfig from application-specific things. And as that sort of coupling is the way that most code bases die in the end, I think all the decoupling we can do is the best.
Can it be too decoupled?
Yes, because we want to be cohesive.
Oh.
But nobody knows what that means, so I'm not going to go there.
Right. Is it the party yet?
We are very nearly there. So just one little thing. We have these dbconfig froms. I mean, I love lenses, but I can't read that.
Yeah, I see.
Why is it so? Okay, so it's actually a function. There's another version, extract. Yeah. You see, I think that should have been called extract from. Sorry, Dave.
Maybe environment. Like there is a way to get, I think. Yeah. Right, I can do this instead. Right.
Yes.
That's a getter.
So helpfully, we have two ways round. This is this to and from thing. We could either take a lens and apply it to an environment, or we can use the environment to invoke a lens. And because we can do two things both ways around, we actually now have expressive code. We can change our minds, and we can use the lenses in whichever way makes sense to our caller. So again, switching to and from is a very nice technique.
Did you also have this, that you showed me this thing earlier, the party tree, different curly braces?
Oh, yeah, so little known fact, Kotlin has bold braces and not bold braces. Dmitry is taking it to the wire. So it turns out that the braces that define sort of like static scope, if you like, those that are around functions and class definitions and so on, those are not bold. But lambda braces are bold.
And you can command click on them, it says.
And
no
you can command click and then nothing.
That's the usage. Right.
So if you take nothing else away from this, you're the people that know that we have two different styles of braces. I think we're running out of time, so shall we cut to...
Do you have thoughts?
Well, we'll find out, whatever the slides say. Okay. So in preparing this talk, I think we learned that understanding natural language with very high bandwidth, but it's not actually good for programming in. But we can bridge that gap. Some things we learned from doing the refactorings: we want to pay attention to readability at the call site. Prepositions are such an easy win. They're just so easy to put in, entirely painless. And we may need to make changes when our context changes. So look at where code is called, and if you change the definition of something, you may need to go and visit all the places it's called, and vice versa. Alias, oh, nearly done. Aliases can help, but we can't alias methods. But aliasing standalone functions can really help. And this technique of moving a parameter to receiver and back and renaming something that's to and from, I think is really powerful in making our code expressive. 57 seconds. Apply. So these are quick aid memoir on what I think, we think maybe, scope functions are doing. Apply, we use to configure mutable objects. Also is for little side effects. Let, good for piping arguments, sorting out nullability issues. With, I see a sort of import from a variable. And extension functions, well, they're fantastic for ordering, making the order of things work, and for reducing coupling. This session was inspired by Lisa Ray's 2018 talk at Kotlin Conf in Amsterdam, which we commend to you. It's very good. There will be a resources thing a bit later on if you want to find that.
You might have noticed I committed with tidy up comment, and that's like basically refactoring can backroad new book, tidy first. You know, a good question mark, should have we spent 45 minutes on this file? Yeah. So yeah, you'll see. And based on this book, I'm writing this blog post of what I consider tidy Kotlin, like small transformations that can make your code better, I think. Also, Duncan has been doing YouTubing for 2 years now.
I have, and so this code base is from a Gilded Rose stock control system I've been writing on YouTube. The code is on GitHub, and all those resources are behind that for you. The countdown has reached 0.
Sure.
Do come and see us if you haven't taken a picture quickly enough, because now we have to show this one that says thank you, and don't forget to vote. What happened to time?